All right, we got Mike McDaniel on the line from Saturday Blitz and Tech Lunch Pail, and also Dan Rubin from Eagles Unlimited. So, Mike, we've kicked this around many an off season, time and time again, in terms of conference structure, the competition of the conferences, who's good, who's the best. The ACC has obviously been a target of ours. Clemson wins it, so in a sense, the ACC can all jump on board the other 13 teams and say, we're the national champions. On the other hand, it was a rough year for the conference overall. Your thoughts about the ACC based on what we saw last season, what you expect to see out of the conference this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think a big reason why a lot of people were doubting Clemson heading into the playoff last year is because the conference overall was so weak and Clemson just kind of ran through it, right? The only time Clemson was really challenged was against Texas A&M. You can count the Syracuse game, I guess, but Trevor Lawrence got hurt. And, you know, if he's in that game for the entirety of the game, I think we're thinking a little bit differently about that outcome and the margin of the final score. Clemson's a team that they are so dominant right now at an SEC type level. I know ACC, fans of the conference are going to hate me for saying that, but it's a different level that Clemson is on right now from the rest of the ACC, right? It's just not, I mean, there are some teams that have talent, Miami, Florida State, who can recruit similarly to Clemson, but can't necessarily top their talent right now at all phases, all levels, right? The depth is the difference between Clemson and the rest of the conference right now. And I think the ACC as a whole just didn't have a great year last year. Now heading into this year, there's a lot to be optimistic about. You have Scott Satterfield at Louisville. You have the return of Mac Brown at North Carolina. You have Willie Taggart in year 2 at Florida State. More importantly, the hiring of Kendall Briles is a big reason why a lot of people are high on Florida State, perhaps being a bounce back candidate in the Atlantic Division this year. Syracuse continues to build under Dino Babers, and they've had a really encouraging rebuild with their program, and he's done a great job there. 4-star quarterback in Tommy DeVito leading the way. I think Virginia Tech is really not all that far away, again, from competing in the Coastal Division. I guess we'll find out here when the season kicks off on Saturday when they play Boston College. If you lose that 50-50 game, maybe I'm talking a little bit differently next week, Mark. But I think there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic, right? And Miami, right? It looks like they found a quarterback in Jaron Williams. It looked ugly at times on Saturday, but I think that the overarching theme of that game was Jaron Williams didn't look scared. He didn't throw the ball to the other team. Those are all positives. And when looking at Miami, they have talent on defense and they have playmakers. Just find a quarterback who doesn't screw up more often than not. And I think they'll be in decent shape. So there's reasons to be optimistic about the conference as a whole. Clemson is far and away the best team. They're the heavy favorite. I don't think anybody is expecting them to lose this conference this year. I think they're just far and away on multiple levels of their team, the best team in the ACC. But I think for the conference as a whole, I think that it will be a bounce back year for the ACC. I think a lot of people are sleeping on the Coastal Division in particular. That could get pretty competitive. And I'm not talking competitive from a Pittsburgh standpoint where they have a 500 record and they're winning the division. I think that there are multiple teams this year who could step up, have winning records in that division, and have an opportunity to get to Charlotte and at least show adequately in the ACC championship game. I don't know what the final score is going to end up being against a team like Clemson, but I think it'll at least be semi competitive for a quarter or two, which would be a step up from recent years here in the ACC championship game.
Yeah, Dan, I bring up scheduling rotation. I'm thinking that if Clemson keeps this up for very much longer, there should be some kind of rotation of Atlantic Division teams like cycling through the Coastal, that they should give those teams a break and let them play in the Coastal for a couple of years and cycle everybody through the rest of the conference.
It reminds me a lot of a Massachusetts high school conference up here where one team managed to win, I think, like 26 or 27 straight league championships. And at some point, other teams started just leaving the league rather than having to play them. So I won't get into the semantics of it on a national radar, because if I start shouting out Massachusetts team names, first of all, I'll lose any semblance of being able to speak the English language because I'll slide back into my Boston accent. But at the same time, I don't want to do that to anybody and start talking about Massachusetts high school ball. Now, that said, look, I I get it. I get that until somebody knocks off Clemson, they're the number one team in the league as well. They should be. I think when we're talking about a preseason on paper perspective, Clemson is number one. They're number one probably for most people in the country. They deserve that record. They deserve that moniker. They got the rings to prove it. They're the man. Now, if this is part of the reason why I've evolved kind of my mentality when people ask me about record predictions and things of that nature, that I tend not to give them as much anymore, because I feel that it is almost impossible to look at a schedule in November without playing through September and getting through the first game of the season. So it is virtually impossible to predict what will happen in the Atlantic Division or happen in the Coastal Division or in any type of crossover game when we're looking at the first game of the season, because you never know what's going to happen type of thing. So if I'd have sat here before last year and said Syracuse can be a 10-win football team, a lot of people would have probably looked at me and said, well, there's no basis for you to say that, Dan. And I could have spouted off about Eric Dungy and Orange is the New Fast and Dino Babers, and people would have looked at me and said, no, Florida State's a 10-win team. Syracuse is never going to win 10 games. Boston College is never going to win more than 7 games. 7-win Steve Addazio. That's just what Boston College does. So, but we're in the first week of the season, and there's no way to predict what will happen. Virginia Tech very well could wind up this year being substantially better than 6-6. You just don't know. So at this point, you just have to look at week one if you're any of these teams, and Clemson's still the number one top dog. I don't think anybody wants to dispute that. But at the same time, you want to take your shot at them. You want that opportunity to beat them because, and I'm an ACC guy. I'm an ACC Boston College guy. I understand what life is like in North Carolina, so I'm going to paraphrase one man when it comes to Charlotte. To be the man, you got to beat the man. And right now, Clemson is the man. So if you knock off Clemson, look, we could be sitting here in November watching Florida State playing an ACC championship game, watching NC State an ACC championship game. We just don't know, though prediction-wise, probably says Clemson.
Yeah, we don't know, but we do know.
We know.
we know, Dan, and that's why they're called predictions, Dan. See,
right? I know.
I know.
In
this case,
I tend to take the circumventional way on it. I know.
I don't think that I've seen in all the years of watching college football a bigger lock to win a division championship than Clemson is this year in the Atlantic.
If I come back in November and whatever low the percentage is, there is still the percentage. And Steve Addazio, I sat in media day and Steve Addazio said something that really imprinted on me. Somebody asked, what are you expecting? How do you get over 7 wins? Are you expecting 8 wins? Are you expecting 9 wins? And he goes, well, what am I? If I tell you I'm going to be expecting 8 wins, what do I do with the other 4 games? Tell you I'm expecting to lose them? You go in every single week trying to win those games. So yes, Clemson is the number 1 team in the country as of week 1. But I think if you're any team, if you don't think you can show up and beat that team on Saturday, don't bother showing up. So every single one of these teams is showing up expecting that they have a game plan that if they execute it the way they think they should, they can take a win off anybody. And I think that is why the ACC is going to have a bounce back year, because every team can show up on Saturday with an expectation that says, I don't care how good this team is. I don't care what their reputation is. I've got a game plan and I've got the personnel to shock them and beat them like Syracuse did 2 years ago.
Absolutely. These are big-time scholarship athletes. I want them marching out onto the field thinking we can take them down and having that belief. We're sitting on our couches, though, and we make predictions, and we can see the Clemson's a zillion times better than these other teams.
I think, Mark, that's the biggest difference in the ACC heading into this year than a year ago. You had a lot of teams who didn't have that belief, right? And I'm not saying that these teams have gotten substantially better, but I think they have coaching staffs that instill that type of belief in them, where they're going to head into big games this year and they're going to show better just by the virtue of having that belief, right? Miami having Manny Diaz, I think, is huge. They didn't necessarily have the belief in Mark Richt last year. Louisville, the prime example, right? Bobby Petrino. They quit on Bobby Petrino. They quit on Brian Van Gorder. They quit on that coaching staff, right? You come in this year with Scott Satterfield, a guy who's highly motivated to do well, And I think Louisville is going to be in a great position. Georgia Tech, I still think they were playing hard for Coach Johnson, but it's one of those things where you get towards the end of a coaching tenure and, you kind of know this guy's on the path to retirement or maybe being let go or, a mutual split. And the team kind of senses that. And you feel just a different vibe about Georgia Tech. I don't think they're going to be very good this year, but you feel a different vibe under Jeff Collins, at least on the recruiting trail, which is where Georgia Tech needs to just completely overhaul everything. So you have the belief this year in the ACC is my point. And I think that's the biggest difference between last year and this year. Even at North Carolina with Larry Fedora, Larry Fedora had a pretty solid coaching career at North Carolina, spiraled a little bit out of control the last couple of years. Now they have Mac Brown. A lot of people on the outside are doubting Mac Brown, but a lot of people within the program believe in him. And a lot of those players who he's recruiting out on the trail believe in his message and what he's putting out there. And he's been doing well so far on the trail, and he's got a lot of guys in the locker room who believe in his message and what he's been putting out there. So it's just going to be a different conference from the standpoint of belief. And I think that's the biggest difference from this year from last year. Does that mean it translates to more wins on the field and a more competitive conference? Maybe not this year, but I think over the next few years, I think the arrow has to be pointing up in the direction of the ACC.
And the guy that I believe in is in Charlottesville, Virginia. So Bronco Mendenhall, when he was at BYU, he won 99 and lost 49 games. He was winning 67% of his games plus and finishing in the top 25 more times than not. Since he left, BYU's been a 500 program. He comes to Charlottesville. The first year, he basically didn't care what the record was. He had to just rebuild the program, start from scratch. He made a comment that he only saw like 25 ACC caliber players on the roster. He goes from 2 wins to 6 to 8 and a big bowl win against South Carolina. Now, I don't think that they've necessarily arrived. I think there's a lot more work to do, but you can at least see the progress that he's made, and the defense is really good. They've got a quarterback. They need to find some playmakers now that they've lost a couple of their best, but they're going to have a date at Miami that I'm predicting them to win the Coastal Division. Even though I don't think the roster's as good, I do believe in his program. I believe in what he's doing. I believe in his quarterback and his defense.
The one thing I'll say about Mike London, or the one thing I'll say about Bronco Mendenhall, I'm getting into a point about Mike London, so throwback. Mike London couldn't get a quarterback like Bryce Perkins on his roster. That was the biggest difference, I think, from Bronco Mendenhall, coming into Virginia, is that he was able to pull a guy like Bryce Perkins as a graduate transfer, a guy who came into the program and produced right away at a level that a lot of people weren't necessarily expecting. And Perkins' ability to throw the football, I think, is the thing that was most surprising. A lot of people expected him to be athletic coming into last year and make some plays with his feet. The fact that he made a lot of plays within the pocket, I think, is a scary thought for the rest of the ACC and a reason why Virginia is, of course, a preseason pick to win the division.
Virginia Tech, a 3-point favorite at Boston College, as the two old rivals and tongue-in-cheek meet in Chestnut Hill. We got Dan Rubin on the line from Eagles Unlimited, Mike McDaniel from, of course, Mike, you move around so much, I got to find your deal here. There we go. Saturday Blitz, of course, and Tech Lunch Pail. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, breaking down BC and Virginia Tech. We appreciate you guys stopping by.
Thanks, man.
Hey, anytime I get to talk with a fellow Patriots fan like Mike, I'm on board with it.